I came across the alleged last words of a very wealthy man who died in 2011. And it reads as follows: I reached the pinnacle of success in the business world. In others' eyes, my life is the epitome of success. However, aside from work, I have little joy. In the end, wealth is only a fact of life that I am accustomed to. At the moment, lying on the sick bed and recalling my whole life, I realized that all the recognition and wealth that I took so much pride in have paled and become meaningless in the face of impending death. In the darkness, I look at the green lights from the life-supporting machines and hear the humming mechanical sounds. I can feel the breath of the God of death drawing closer. Now I know when we have accumulated sufficient wealth to last our lifetime, we should pursue other matters that are unrelated to wealth. These are the last words, allegedly, of Steve Jobs from 1955 to 2011. The reason I say allegedly, because his sister said that these were not his last words. His last words were, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." And the reason he was saying that is because he had family members gathered around his bed, and he was shocked by how many people, but those were his last words. But this letter, these words, really capture the essence of this snippet of 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 to 19, that when wealth is all there is and is not balanced with a relationship with Jesus Christ, it goes back to what Solomon said, that it's all meaningless, it's all vain when wealth is not coupled with a relationship with Jesus Christ. One of our members said to me, just sent me an email just a couple of days ago, and she was looking forward to hearing this message, and she talked about the rec room, W-R-E-C-K, and the rec room. And she said sometimes there has to be a wreck before we include Christ in our rec room. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, sometimes we feel like our life is a wreck, that we're at our wits' end and we don't know which way to turn. And sometimes when we go through life without Christ, sometimes things fall apart. But this text is an invitation to understand and to examine, and this is my first point in the rec room of life, to examine our relationship with wealth. To examine our relationship with wealth. Paul invites us into this conversation, this letter that he writes to Timothy. And he says in verse 17, "As for those who in the present age are rich, command them not to be haughty, or to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but rather on God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." Well, you see, Paul is advising this young pastor, Timothy, to say something to the rich folks in his church. And Timothy is someone who has a little fear, little anxiety, and Paul has to encourage him that God has not given you a spirit of fear. And I can only imagine Timothy going to the richest people in his church and commanding them not to be haughty. But it points to a greater reality, that our relationship with wealth can be detrimental to our spiritual health. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy, but we must keep wealth in its proper place. Don't allow it to enslave your heart. Don't allow materialism to divide your mind. Don't allow possessions to control your will. Paul gives us a healthy perspective on wealth and riches. As we read between the lines of Paul's instructions to Timothy, he says in so many words that wealth is not an end, but a means to an end. Instead of being haughty, he says to them, seek to be humble. Have a posture of humility because everything that God has blessed you with, it came from the hand of God. Instead of putting your hope in riches, put your hope in God. This is what Paul is advising Timothy to say to the congregation, not only to the rich, but to the poor. Between the shell of humility and hope lies the pearl of enjoyment. Wealth is not an end, but a means to an end. And Paul instructs Timothy to specifically address those who are rich in this present age, implying that there is an age to come. Not to think more highly of themselves than they ought to think. Being rich has a way of puffing us up and making us think that we are better than those of lesser means. Paul's words strike the core of human selfishness, challenging the rich to examine themselves in the light of God's grace. Brothers and sisters, let us notice here that there is an enjoyment that leads to sin and pride, and there is an enjoyment that leads to holiness and righteousness. We are accustomed to dividing life into the spiritual and the material. And we say to ourselves and say to the Lord, Lord, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to be spiritual, but let me handle this material stuff, Lord. This isn't any of your business. Lord, I don't mind worshiping you and doing some things in the church, but let me have my little recreation things, and you don't need to be included in this, Lord. But if we are not careful, we can edge God out of our lives and not even know it. So let us understand that a right attitude toward wealth is the mark of true spirituality. For you see, enjoyment without God can become a form of idolatry. Enjoyment can be a form of idolatry. We can lift enjoyment up to such a degree that it takes the place of God. Kind of reminds me of a book written by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. That we can be so wrapped up in technology, we can be so wrapped up in AI, we can be so wrapped up in our cell phones, we can be so wrapped up in the latest and greatest things in life that it can become a form of idolatry. I believe it was Abraham Kuyper who said, there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. That we all belong to Christ, that we were bought with a price, that we belong to him, that we are a temple of God. We are precious in his sight. And God says, you belong to me. Amen.